Can KRA really freeze your bank account because of unpaid housing levy? Can they deactivate your KRA PIN? And what about your business or your property? These are the questions that many taxpayers or many Kenyans are asking after the new enforcement powers that took effect on 1st July 2026 through the Finance Act 2026. So let's break down these new housing levy enforcement powers and what really they mean to employees, employers, and business owners. So what actually changed for 1st July 2026? So let me clarify something important first. The Affordable Housing Levy is not a new thing. So the levy was passed or has been in place since 2024, and the rate has also not changed. So what actually changed is on 1st July 2026 is how KRA can enforce the payment of the levy when it remains unpaid. So the Finance Act 2026 introduced a new provision under Section 39B into the Tax Procedures Act, where KRA is responsible for collecting a fee, a levy, or a charge under another written law. An unpaid amount can be recovered as it is or as it were unpaid tax. And that is a very important change because once an unpaid housing levy falls within that recovery framework, the KRA can use the enforcement mechanisms provided under the Tax Procedures Act to recover the outstanding amount. So when you hear headlines like bank accounts, assets, and PINs, this is where that story is coming from. So it's not that KRA has introduced a new housing levy. It is that KRA now has a stronger legal authority to pursue amounts that are already due and remain unpaid. Now, who is supposed to pay the housing levy? If you are an employee, the housing levy is 1.5% of your gross salary, and the employer also contributes another 1.5%. So you'll be deducting 1.5% from your side. And then the employer will also pay another 1.5% for you. But here is something many people also don't know. The housing levy is not only for employees. If you are self-employed, for example, you are a trader, freelancer, consulting, if you are running a small business out there without employees, you also have to pay housing levy. You have that obligation because you are earning money or earning income in Kenya. So for this category, the housing levy is 1.5% of your gross income, not your profit. So if you are self-employed and you have been thinking, housing levy ni ya watu tu wako kwa payroll, by the way, this is something that you need to pay attention to. I saw a joke somewhere that now the business people have started now complaining about the housing levy. Yet the employees 2 years ago, they were complaining and the business people were like their hands were folded because they thought it does not affect them. Really, that was the assumption actually for most of us. But shock on us, this applies for everybody that is making money in Kenya. So if you are self-employed and you have some income but you have not been paying the housing levy, then don't ignore this information. So how much are we talking about here? For example, the calculation for an employee is 1.5% of gross salary. For example, if you have a salary of 50,000 shillings, 1.5% of that is 750. So as an employee, you'll be deducted 750, then the employer contributes another 750 shillings. That means the total housing levy contribution for that employee is 1,500 shillings for that month. Now, what about people who are earning income outside employment, or we may call them the self-employed people? So remember, for self-employed, they also pay 1.5% of their gross income, not profit. So 1.5% is calculated on gross income, not your profit. So for example, let's say you are a self-employed trader and your business has gross income of 500,000 shillings in that month. You have expenses that you need to pay for your business. So after all the expenses, you are left, let's say, with a profit of 70,000 shillings. you don't calculate the housing levy from 70,000 shillings. The levy will be based on the 500,000 shillings gross income. So if you do 1.5% of that, that will give you 7,500 shillings. And that is how KRA will establish your total housing levy payable. So how will KRA maybe know or verify the gross income? They can use information available from tax and transaction records to verify your income and the compliance. So for example, they can use items records or withholding tax information where relevant. So if let's say your records they show income that should have attracted the housing levy, but you have not been declaring or paying that levy. Now that can become a compliance issue definitely. So the payment deadline is also important for a housing levy. So this housing levy is always payable not later than the 9th day, or let's say date 9 of every month. So if for example in this month of August, date 9, you should have paid housing levy for July. So we pay housing levy this month for last month. So you calculate your total gross income for July. Then you calculate 1.5% of that, and then you pay to the housing levy. Now let's talk about what happens when the housing levy is not paid. The Affordable Housing Act provides for a penalty of 3% on the unpaid amount for every month or part of a month that the amount remains unpaid. So let me give you an example. Suppose you have an outstanding housing levy of 10,000 shillings. Now, for the first month, 3% of that will be 300 shillings. That will be your penalty for month 1. Now, if it remains unpaid for the second month, like month ya pili haujalipa bado, another 300 shillings penalty applies. If it remains unpaid for the third month, then another 300 shillings applies. So this is for a particular month. Assuming this was June, or let's say May. May you are supposed to pay 10,000 shillings. You didn't pay. You got a penalty of 300. On June, you didn't pay 8. The May housing levy. You still get another 300 shillings penalty. On July, you didn't pay it. You still get another penalty. For that's just 1 month. So after the 3 months, you will have accumulated 900 shillings in penalties on top of the original 10,000 shillings housing levy. And remember, the law says that every month or part of a month. So every month, or the month you didn't pay, it accumulates that amount. So you don't want to leave any outstanding housing levy sitting there and assume that maybe you'll deal with it later. Remember, it's accumulating a lot of penalties. So this is where the changes that took place or took effect on 1st July 2026 becomes important to you, because KRA now has stronger mechanisms to recover qualifying unpaid levies. So those all debts that you have not paid, now they have the power to recover that money. Now let's answer these questions that has probably caught the attention of most people, and that is, can KRA really go after my bank account? Yes, unpaid housing levy can now be pursued using the tax recovery mechanisms available to KRA. So one of those mechanisms is called an agency notice. So in simple terms, we say KRA can serve a notice to a third party that holds money belonging to a taxpayer. And in this case, we have M-Pesa, we have, let's say Safaricom. For M-Pesa, we have bank accounts, and that is where agency notice comes in. So for example, if you have money in your bank account, and the bank may receive an agency notice requiring it to pay the specified amount towards the outstanding liability or the money that you're supposed to pay, deni yako ya KRA, subject to the legal requirements and procedures. So this is an agency type recovery process. That is what it is called. So when you see the headline that KRA can freeze your bank account over housing levy, this is the important thing that to understand, that this is that is where it is talking about the recovery of an outstanding liability. That is what it's called. In simple terms, ni deni yako yenye KRA, they say that you have not paid this housing levy, so they have the authority to. We have freezing account has not started now, it has been there for so long. Many people have their accounts freezed because maybe they have long outstanding dues and they're not communicating with KRA to know how they will pay, and then their accounts are freezed so that they can put their records in order. So it does not mean that KRA can simply wake up one morning and randomly take money from you or from any bank account because they have maybe not paid the housing levy. There has to be an amount due and recoverable amount, and the applicable legal process has to be followed. So if maybe they have asked you to pay, you have not paid, that is the moment maybe they can go ahead and go after your bank account. But if you they tell you you have some amount that you need to pay, then you end a call and you have an agreement on how you can make your payment, then you're good to go. So another question is, can KRA really deactivate your KRA PIN? And the answer is yes, because this is also an area that business owners, they need to take seriously. It has been there, it has happened before. The Tax Procedures Act, it gives KRA the enforcement powers that they can include suspension or deactivation of a taxpayer's PIN where they feel that they need to. So if there is unpaid tax and this has been affected, that now unpaid housing levy inahesabiwa kama unpaid tax. So KRA has the power to do that, and they can deactivate your PIN as a business person until you make the required payments. So why is this important? Because for a business owner, a KRA PIN is connected to many normal business activities that you do every day and your tax activities. So you may require your tax compliance certificate, you may require to submit your KRA PIN. They can check, many businesses, they check the validity of your KRA PIN, if it is deactivated or not. They have to check. So if they check in their system and they find it's deactivated, then you cannot do the normal business transactions. So if your PIN is deactivated, it can interfere with your transactions and services that you require valid KRA PIN. So, but again, KRA is not just going to deactivate it just directly. They have to communicate to you to make the relevant payments due. If not done, then they can go ahead and do whatever they have to do. So what about your business assets or property? That's another query. So the recovery mechanisms available under the Tax Procedures Act are not limited to bank accounts only. You said there, number one, you have bank accounts, and of course, M-Pesa was added there. Number two, we have the suspension of the KRA PIN. Number three, they can use recovery of assets or property. So where the law allows, KRA can take steps to secure or to recover an outstanding liability using a taxpayer's assets or property if the debt is so much. They have the authority to do that. So this can include placing restrictions or claims against your property, and where the applicable legal requirements are met, they can attach and sell your asset to recover the outstanding debt. But before it gets to that, it rarely gets to that, but before it gets to that, they will have communicated and tried all the means possible. So if you're running a business and you have been ignoring maybe your housing levy obligations for a long time, remember it's from 2024. So what they are going to do, they are going to check records from 2024. Remember, 2024, 2025, we are in 2026. So they'll have to calculate the debt for all that period. Okay, so an unpaid statutory liability can eventually become a recovery issue later if the amount is so much. And that's why businesses, they need to take their payroll and tax compliance seriously. If you have business owner and you have employees, housing levy ni kama haitusamehewi hapo. You have to make sure that you do the necessary. Now, what if you are an employer and you deducted but did not remit? But the way we have employers like that, they deducted the housing levy and they did not submit. I don't know why they would do that, but we have them. So this one is particularly very important to you because you deducted 1.5% housing levy from their salaries, your employees' salaries. You recorded the deduction in their payroll, but you did not remit the money to KRA. So what happens? The employer is responsible and it's required to submit to deduct the employee's contribution and remit it together with other employees' contributions together with his own contribution. So if the amount becomes due and they fail to remit it, you have an outstanding obligation. And remember, the 3% penalty applies to unpaid amount for every month. Every month. So if since 2024 you have been having employees and you have never submitted, now you can see the records will be so hard from 2024 up to date. Okay, so this is therefore something not something an employer should simply leave it sitting there or assume that KRA will not notice, because they will. They will compare information from different parts of your tax records. For example, you are filing payee returns every month. You are declaring employees and their salaries. Because remember, when declaring pay, you have declared their salaries. So there's no way you can say their housing levy. You cannot lie because they already have records of pay. Okay? So if the records of the payee and the housing levy, they do not correspond with that information, then can create a compliance issue. So if you are an employer, reconcile your payroll records well. So check the gross salaries, then check the housing levy deductions, then check the employer contributions, check what you declared when filing, and then check what you actually paid. You want to know exactly where you stand. If you have any issues with KRA, ujipange mapema. So what should you do if you're watching this and you're thinking, wait, I may have an outstanding housing levy liability, ama hujui utaanza wapi? So first of all, don't panic about everything and don't wait for KRA to come knocking before you start looking at your records. So if you're an employer, review your payroll records for the relevant period since 2024. Then check your employee deductions, check your employer contributions, check your housing levy deductions, and check your actual payments to KRA. If you are self-employed or earning income outside employment, you review your housing levy obligations. I'm sure 90% of us have not been doing the submission, including myself. So we have to check everything based on the type of income that you earn and confirm whether the required amounts are declared and paid. And in most cases, I'm sure it was not. So make sure that you check the records that KRA have, especially for withholding tax, for e-TIMS. Before e-TIMS was not so much into effect in 2024, but you had withholdings. So make sure you check. And then you can communicate. If you discover that you have an outstanding amount, find out exactly how much that you owe, including any applicable penalties, and take steps to clear the outstanding amount. Right now we have tax amnesty, so I guess it's the best time to clear those payments. I'm sure that's why KRA are rushing out to people, so that if you find that you have housing levy that you have not been paying since 2024, then you can pay the principal amount. Then they can do away with your penalties up to December 2025, and then you can pay the only penalties you'll pay, maybe it's from January to date. So if you have an outstanding housing levy and you're not able to clear the full amount at once, don't simply ignore it. you can approach KRA, actually they are approachable in that case, and inquire about the available payment arrangements for settling the balance, the outstanding amount. It is very important thing to deal with the liability before KRA begins enforcement actions. Actually, if you approach us, you go yourself to KRA and you have an arrangement on how to pay, and you honor that arrangement, they will never come after you. The problem is you waiting for them to come for you. Ujipeleke tu, and then you're able to come to an agreement and see what you can afford to pay and how you can pay. Then your bank account will be safe, your assets will be safe, your KRA PIN will be safe. You can also consider involving a tax consultant to help you review and analyze your records properly, especially if you don't have an accountant in your business. If you are self-employed or you have employees, you can involve a third party and then you'll be able to be advised where necessary. So this is especially important if you are not sure how your housing levy was calculated or whether the amount showing as outstanding is actually correct. So in conclusion today, the questions we have answered is, can KRA really go after your bank account because of unpaid housing levy? And the answer is a big yes. The changes that took effect on 1st July 2026, they allow unpaid levies corrected by KRA to be recovered using the tax recovery machinery subject to the applicable legal process that KRA seems is best in this case. So can KRA PIN be affected? Yes. When the legal requirements for enforcement are met? Yes. And can your assets or your property become part of the recovery process? Yes. But the most important thing I want you to take away from this video is the housing levy itself is not something new. It has been there. The only thing for self-employed people, we thought it's for employees only, but it's for every person. So what changed on 1st July 2026 is the enforcement machinery available to KRA to recover unpaid housing levy. So don't just react to the scary headlines out there. Check your compliance. It's time to check your books, to go back to your books, to the drawing board, find out how much you owe, if anything, and if you have a outstanding liability, deal with it before it becomes a bigger problem. So if you found this video helpful or useful, just subscribe to our channel for more practical updates on KRA, taxes,